About the macroeconomy numbers, let's now come down to what's happening to individuals and their finances. The one indicator that we have is that the per capita GDP is now down to numbers last seen in 2016-17, which is 99,700, which is India's total GDP per capita divided by the population. So therefore, if you were to look at per capita GDP numbers, we're now in a spot where countries like Bangladesh are ahead of us. What are you making of this decline? The fact that while it's hit government finances, most certainly individual finances have been very badly impacted as well. How concerned are you about that?
So, Rahul, this has to be seen in the context of the exceptional period that the global economy has been experiencing. Last year, the IMF's economic report had pointed out that if you look at the number of countries where GDP per capita is on a decline, that proportion is at a 150-year high. I think that is something that you have to keep in mind. There has been a decline, as you have seen in yesterday's numbers, 7.3%, which has been better than the revised estimates, that the second advanced estimates of 8%. But still 6.3% decline, which has had an impact on the numerator that you talked about. So your numerator has basically declined and the denominator has grown at 1.5–2%, and therefore this is just the arithmetic. I think the recovery that has happened since the first quarter is something that does give us encouragement that once the effect of the pandemic, the second wave, is lower, then the economy should be back, and some of the pent-up demand also should come back. If you notice, as I was mentioning, consumption did increase in the fourth quarter by about 2.7% because of the spending that happened on construction sector, the overall infrastructure spending, and that is an emphasis that the country has placed through its economic policy, which will help in accelerating.
So you mentioned, Dr. Subramanian, pent-up demand, and if the economy, once the second wave gets over and things start opening up, is to bounce back, pent-up demand will be very important. But the flip side to this is, given the high fatality, given the high medical bills that people have run up, given the distress, given the unemployment, the financial condition of the Indian household may be such that pent-up demand that you're banking on may not immediately materialize, because there is unlike the first wave where you were locked down but you didn't feel the pinch yourself, here many families, many seeing this broadcast at this time, have felt the death, the devastation, the misery and the financial expenses too.
So here's where I would go back to the budget this year, which was commended across the board for the expansionary stance that was taken by the government in trying to increase expenditure, especially expenditure on infrastructure, on construction activity. As we've discussed just now, that has had its impact in the fourth quarter. Eventually, when you look at the evidence, sustained growth comes from investment, especially private investment, that is crowded in by public sector investment in infrastructure. And the government in its budget had actually taken this into account and has taken a significantly expansionary stance. The impact of that will indeed come in. You have to keep in mind that despite the local restrictions in the month of April, the core measure of infrastructure production had recorded a growth of 56% in the month of April. Of course, has been through a lower base as of last year, but still the emphasis on infrastructure is certainly there, and which will create jobs in the informal sector, and that is the way to really put money in the hands of people and enable the economic recovery.
What are you making of the joblessness numbers that have come out? The Center for Monitoring of Indian Economy estimates that since the beginning of the pandemic last year, 97% of Indian households have seen a decline in their incomes, and 10 million Indians have lost their job because of the second wave of the COVID pandemic. Do you agree with these assessments? How concerned are you? What's the government's plan to fix the employment situation?
Rahul, I must point out that a senior official in the ministry that works in my team had written a very, very nice piece in the Economic Times, pointing out some of the inadequacies in the survey methodologies of CMI, on the employment front. For instance, if a smell test that is quite critical, employment changes should correlate with economic growth, which it does not in the case of the CMI. In contrast, the periodic labor force survey (PLFS) indeed does. So, I would actually wait for the PLFS numbers. I think there is no denying that there will be some impact of the second wave, on this. But I think the numbers have to be from a reliable source for us to actually take this into account. As I said, yesterday as well in my press briefing, the overall impact of the second wave is not likely to be very large. It is certainly going to be there, but not very large, given the fact that it is, a shorter time period, very high, a peak, and then actually a very fast pace of decline as well. So once the restrictions are removed and economic activity comes back, which is indeed what happened, and if you recall, after the first quarter numbers had come, I had indeed mentioned that there will be a recovery, and I'm glad to mention that indeed did transpire, based on the economic assessments. So I see no reason why, once the restrictions are removed now as well, that economic activity should come back, and that should enable the recovery, that had been happening up till March. Some of the momentum has been affected because of the second wave, but once the second wave, actually the decline happens fully, I think the economic activity should come back, and the recovery should proceed along.